Dan Shur is the Senior Director of Government Programs at EmblemHealth, where he leads the development of community-centric EmblemHealth neighborhood care and the EmblemHealth special populations. In addition, Mr. Shur is responsible for building and launching Emblem's managed long-term care and FIDA products for the frail, the elderly, and the disabled. For more than 20 years, Mr. Shur worked in key areas of healthcare at Cayuga Medical Center, Prudential, Goldman Sachs, and Cigna before joining EmblemHealth in 2009. Dan holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Cornell University and an MBA from Cornell's Samuel Curtis Johnson Graduate School of Management. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some perspective with you. I'm appreciative to note that after listening to the other presentations, I'm not going to color outside the lines and say anything off target. I think that what I have to share with you today will amplify what everyone else has said and shared with you. Fortunately, the vision that at least that my health plan and my team share really is all about person-centricity. Okay, putting a person in the middle and understanding that they're not a number, that they are a real person. Just like we were talking about with the pictures of our grandparents, our parents, our friends, our neighbors. These are people, and we have to always remember that. We want to offer more choices, and we want to offer more benefits. There's a lot of resources out there. One of our premises is that there are more than enough resources in the community to serve the needs of the people we serve. It's just a matter of connecting the dots and harnessing them. And so that's something that guides us. Highly coordinated, I think that's been one of the themes today. With all these resources out in the community and all these different providers out there, it's really about coordination. It's about bringing it all together. And we want to make it administratively simple. And these are our North Stars, the things that we navigate towards and that they guide us. And they really color everything that we've been doing as we've been building MLTC out and as we've been implementing FIDA and looking at the HARP and looking at DISCO, and as we've been thinking about how we're going to serve the needs of all these special populations. Really, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the plan, the participants, and the providers are all on the same page. I mean, that's really how it's going to work. I wouldn't say that the system works like that today, but that is our goal. So, some of the considerations, I'll go through this really quickly because I think we've covered a lot of this. When we're thinking about these populations that we want to serve and the nuances of how they need to be served, you have to understand some things, is that they're 10 times more likely than a traditional Medicare beneficiary, of having a low income. And so this colors the decision making and also the access to resources that was mentioned earlier. 2 times greater incidence of mental health. Twice as likely they report themselves as in poor health. So that means that they're going to have higher needs, greater consumption of care and services. 70% more ER visits, 53% more inpatient stays. Throwing a bunch of stats at you to sort of set the picture with some data of of the populations we're looking to serve. And then of course skilled nursing facility stays, much higher incidence of those. The challenge is, as we see it, because we find ourselves in the situation of having to operationalize these great ideas and these visions, and arguably managed care is sort of an interesting juncture in the healthcare system. I wouldn't say it's the most important piece of the system, it's definitely not, okay, but it does find itself often in the center, because at the end of the day, the services all want to get paid, and so they have to share information with the managed care organization. And so this puts us in a unique opportunity of being able to coordinate services, because we have access to information that maybe some of the more important parts of the system don't have access to. So some of the challenges that we observe, and remember, I'm talking at the system level, because that's really where our thinking is, and that's the piece that we bring to the table. It's highly fragmented. We all know that. I mean, just looking across the room, I recognize a lot of the faces. You all represent great organizations. You're all like the tip of an iceberg, okay? But at the end of the day, we're all independent. So how do we get everybody to kind of operate in sync, sort of like an orchestra? There really isn't any end-to-end coordination. I don't think any of you would disagree with me on this. I think that we have regions of coordination, we have spots of coordination, but if you think about it, when you put yourself in the consumer's point of view or the participant's point of view, are all of their needs being contemplated by one entity? I would argue that they're not. And so this is something that we think is a to-do that we need to address. And also we see there's a lot of variability in the system. People have different levels of understanding. They have different perspectives in terms of how something should be done, but there really isn't any uniformity in terms of like how people do things. And so when you talk about we want to bring efficiency to the system, we want to lower costs so we can expand services, one of the key ingredients of doing that is eliminating the variability in the system. And so that's something that also is very prominent in our thinking, is that how do we standardize? How do we bring everybody onto the same page? In this way, it doesn't matter if you're getting services in Brooklyn or the eastern end of Suffolk County, that you're getting the same level of services and also the same high quality level of services. How do we put in place systems and process to enable that? It's a very crowded marketplace, kind of continuing with that theme. Now this is just localized, so within our immediate vicinity, you're looking at 31 MLTC plans, 9 MAP plans, and 23 FIDA plans. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen right now. I mean, to say the least. And I was listening to some of the comments earlier, as the providers are trying to negotiate and set up agreements and working relationships, that's a tall order. I mean, and that goes against what I'm saying in terms of we need to standardize, because now what you're going to have is you're going to have diversity into 23 different directions or 31 directions. Over 400 plus, specialized providers. I mean, EmblemHealth, we have over 100 LICSs in our network. I mean, that is a lot to work with, especially when you consider that, maybe this agency has 2 members and this one has 3 members. And so how do you keep all that coordinated and also make sure that you have the same level of experience? And we also see that there's a definite range of companies and sophistication out there. There are sole proprietors, and then there are very large, complex corporate entities out there. So you're, from the plan perspective, you're dealing with different levels of partners. And they have different needs. They bring different resources to the table. Some will come to us and they'll say, oh, I have nothing. Basically, I just have a couple of nurses and we go into the home and we do our work. Others will come to us and say, you know what, we don't need your care coordination, we don't need your we don't need this, we don't need the best practice, and because we have all that covered. So one of our challenges as we're trying to operationalize this vision is how do we be adaptive and just cover our partners to the extent that they need our help. And so that's one of the challenges. And then, so thinking about the consumers, and I think that this is these sentiments will resonate very strongly with you, is that there's occasional irrationality with our consumers. A lot of times it's not based on medical need, it's based on what you want. And I can't tell you how often I hear my teams are saying, hey, I have this authorization request and want a $40,000 motorized wheelchair. And then you start digging, asking some questions and say, well, I need it because my neighbor has one. And then you're like, but you live in the 5th story of a walk-up. It doesn't matter, I'll park it on the lawn. So, I mean, these anecdotes happen, but I think they do tell a very telling story about some of the irrationality in the system. There's definitely an entitlement mentality. It's a lot of times we're faced with the perspective of, it's not that I need it, it's that I'm allowed to get it, so I want it. And so if we talk about reducing costs, remember, reduction in cost means that we can offer more services. And that's the sole reason for reducing costs. It's not a profit motive. It's about being able to do more with what you have. And so if you're deploying resources or money into areas where they're not needed, then unfortunately somebody's going to get shortchanged. And that's really something else that we keep front and center. And then there's also this needs-based, what we call needs-based rejection. So if the clinical protocols say, or if your doctor recommends you do this, a lot of times we know that the people that we serve, they say, no, we don't want that. Okay, or the caregivers will really get very, energetic, and they will advocate for, I need this level of service, or I want 24-hour nursing care, or I want, these services delivered right away, even though the medical, side of the team is saying it's not necessary. So these are some of the challenges. How do you do that in a delicate way where you're respecting the person, okay, and making sure that they have what they need? And then, of course, we have the tremendous, cultural diversity of New York. I think a lot of this will resonate very strongly with you as well. A lot of times we get requests like, I only want home care services from somebody that speaks Mandarin, and it has to be somebody from China. I will not accept, and so we get these requests. These are common, or I want a certain level of, I want things a certain way. And so how do we, at a system level, try to accommodate these preferences? And that's what they are. I mean, the preferences are very important. They need to be respected. As with all systems, there are limitations in terms of what you can do. And so that's part of the challenge. And then the other thing, and this often goes unthought about, I mean, we all know it, but we don't really talk about it, but providing these services and interacting with these consumers is very draining. It's very draining on the caregivers, it's very draining on the families, and that's something that, sort of needs to be addressed. And I think that you'll appreciate this comment. What I've kind of come to appreciate in the past year is that a lot of times families are they're wiped out, and so they're really looking for somebody to take the burden of caring for their loved one off of them. I don't mean to sound callous, but we see this it's very prevalent within the populations we serve. And so how do we address that? How do we fortify the families? How do we fortify the caregivers? How do we get resources to them to understand that they have needs? If I have to stop what I'm doing and step out of my life for a year to take care of my mother who's sick, who's going to do my job, right? Who's going to take care of my family? And what happens if I get sick doing this? And so these are things that the system sort of doesn't contemplate, but we need to start bringing it front and center because it's sort of like the hidden critical element that makes us successful. The last thing I would say in terms of challenges is implementation. A lot of great ideas, a lot of great vision. So operationalizing it is always where the devil's in the details. Okay, and so we're moving on a pretty aggressive timeline. Okay, and we're up for that. We don't mind building the plane while we're in air. Okay, we'll do that. But that's part of the challenge. That's the job. And there's the other thing is that requirements are incomplete, and that's okay. As I said, this is a voyage of discovery, and we're up for that. And then there's also the practical element. A lot of times with great vision, sometimes there's some impractical pieces to it. And so when you're talking about operationalizing it, for instance, okay, so we want a doctor at the beck and call of the IDT for FIDA, and that they're going to spend a half hour talking about the member. Okay, they're going to expect to get paid for that, and and it doesn't really work like that in the real world. So these are some things that we just have to figure out. How do we tweak it? How do we work with our partners to kind of massage that vision so that it's more workable in a real situation? And one of the things I could share with you from the plan perspective is we've been implementing FIDA is the tremendous partnership that we've been getting from both levels of the government, state and the federal, to work with us on IDT policy and make it more workable. But it is a work in progress, and so more to come on that. So enough of the challenges, and the bubbles really represent a snapshot of a subset of the services we're trying to coordinate. But when you start listing them all out, then you take a step back and you're like, wow, there's a lot going on here. And especially as we talk about letting people receive services in their home, in their community, getting them out of the institutions. One thing that you lose when you do that is you lose the economy of scale. I mean, one of the things that makes a PACE program so interesting is that it's all centralized, it's all localized, it's all right there inside your house. I mean, not in your house, I mean in the health plan's house. When you do it in the community, it's decentralized. And so from a system level, you lose a lot of economy that way. It's not impossible, it's solvable, but it's just not as efficient. So talking about the design solutions, I think that these are some of the really exciting things and the things that keep myself up at night and my team up at night, the things that we get really excited about. So with FIDA, one of the things that I think you're going to see that's going to be it's going to really be like the tip of the spear of change is this concept of an interdisciplinary care team. And I think it's worth pointing out that the interdisciplinary care team is really the external entity of the health outside the health plan. But then you have this care team within the health plan, okay, within the provider organizations that are providing services. There's a whole team of people that are providing perspective and working on behalf of that participant. Just the IDT, you have your primary care physician, you have the member, or excuse me, I should say the participant, you have the designees of the participant, you have the home health care agency in there. But then within the health plan, you have the pharmacist, you have the dietitian, you have the people, you have the service people. And so there's really a lot of people that are part of the team that are operating underneath the hood. And so I think that needs to be acknowledged. And so how do you coordinate that and bring it all together to the benefit of the participant, I think is really what's exciting to operationalize. Administrative supports is something else that we're sort of going into this new frontier. As we talk about bringing together all these services, I mean, one thing that's sort of like implied but not really explicitly said is that you're talking about care and the mechanics of care and bringing those two together. It's one thing to say 4 to 5 doctors recommend you do this, but then how do you do it? And for decades, we've seen that consumers and patients and members from the plan perspective, they get the advice, this is the best practice, but they don't do it because they don't know where to do it or they don't know how to do it. They've never done it before. There's hesitation. And so that's what I talk about, the mechanics of the care. You have to have, resources in place that will enable you to do it and walk with you and show you how. I'm not saying do it for you, okay, but sort of like teach someone how to fish versus give them the fish. Better process design. Once again, we have all the ideas on the table, but it's the design of it. It's about lowering the impact to our partners. I think that this will resonate very strongly also, is that, and we've talked about it earlier, you don't really want 23 different ways of doing something. My job is to make your life easier so you can do your job. Okay, and so giving you or imposing upon you my rules that are different than the other 22 plans, that really doesn't help you do your job. And that's something we understand, and we're working to change that. It's about clarity and communication. This is the process. This is how you need to do something. This is, explanation, insight. It's not about just saying follow these steps, but it's about explaining why you need to follow those steps. This way it'll make sense to you. And, so this is also getting back to design. It's about how we do something. Very important if we're going to implement change in the system. So that's a part of the focus, and one of the things that, the plans, I know all the plans are working on this to a degree. I know I can say that my plan is first and foremost what we're thinking about. And really we have to transform these networks. Networks, it sounds so cold and impersonal, but it's really got to be about partnerships. It's getting back to how can I make your life easier? How can I better equip you as a doctor, as a nurse, as a caregiver to do your job? Because really at the end of the day, the most important thing about this is getting the patient better. And so instead of us kind of, I'll just pick on the example of a health plan, the traditional health plan versus provider dynamic. It's all about, you're providing too many services, well, you're not paying my bills. And at no point while all that dialogue is going on is anybody talking about the patient and their needs. And so that paradigm needs to shift. And it is, and we just need to go further. And so this is why we talk about building partnerships. And, the service models, the health plan represents an opportunity for the provider community to bring synergy into the equation. A standardized way, not 23 different ways, but one way. Okay, and it would be great to get all the plans on the same page, because paying a claim or checking an authorization or checking someone's eligibility, that's really not core to the mission. I mean, that's important stuff. We have to do that, but that's not really what we're here to do. So why don't we invest our resources in figuring out ways to make that simple? That way, you only have to learn how to do it one way across all plans and get that out of the way. So I think that we would agree on that. I see you're agreeing with me. And then kind of, going along that line of thought, it's about best practices. This creates an opportunity to distribute best practices, what the protocols are, and, as I've had the great fortune of working with a really awesome group of providers, for the DISCO, and, over 70 different providers, different perspectives, and really one of the things that struck me is that even though we were working with this partner that had 70, member organizations within it, they had like 70 different voices. And, so that taught me that there's an opportunity here. We can kind of bring everybody together and kind of, get them all on the same page, but we had an opportunity to share, well, you know what, if you want to do care management or if you want to do this is what we've learned, and now take our learnings and take it to the next level. And so we have opportunities to do that. It's also about deploying validated tools. I think for the Lixers in the audience, personal care services is something that rests very heavily on the UAS. And how do you figure out the hours that somebody should get? And what I've seen over the past 2 years working with this is that there's every single tool under the sun, and half of them are not even validated. They're not really rooted in any science, or not something there's just too much inconsistency. So getting back to the system level, if you want to eliminate the variability and you want to have an objective standard, then I think we as a system need to use more of these validated tools. So for instance, with functionality assessment, we use the Sigma FIM. It's a great tool. It's something that's, academics have blessed. It works great. It's consistent. If I give the same tool to 7 different people, okay, then it should be consistent. Or if I give, the tool 7 times to the same person, it should be the same. And that's not something that exists in the system today. So that's an area we're moving towards. And then the last piece is really about, it's kind of the conclusion of my theme. It's about the universal standards. It's about resisting the proprietary mechanisms. I don't really want to teach you the Emblem way of doing something. I really want to figure out, how you do it, and then I'm going to design system, process, and people around that. And then the analogy I always use, and some in the audience will throw something at me for saying it, but you have to study consumer behavior, and that's really the root of it. And it's not about imposing our system on people. It's about planting a plot of grass, looking to see where they walked, and then paving where they walked. You know, and so the elements of design, that's really important, and that's something that has to be introduced into the system. You know, we really need to start and look at how do people consume healthcare and to design out people and process around that. You know, because right now a lot of what we ask people to do is alien to them. It's just not natural, and this is why they don't do it. Yeah. So, you know, our goals, I think that you see this is where the convergence, you know, from our perspective, it's really about better care for the participants. And what I mean for that, that's an overused term, but what I mean for that is better experience. You know, you have to understand, when we're providing services for the frail, elderly, and disabled populations, the experience really does matter. Okay, they're at a point where they're exhausted, they're at a point where it's a low point, they have a number of different challenges, and they're confronted by a highly complex and fragmented system that they neither care to understand nor think that they should have to understand, and I would agree with them. You know, the system should just care for them, and that's our jobs. It's about better outcomes, one of the themes. You know, and all this will really get to improved life. You know, peace of mind for the caregivers, as I said, I want to keep emphasizing that because I see, you know, time and time again that they are such a critical element of this. It's enabling providers to perform the magic and, you know, in getting out of the way. And then using resources. And I think what this will all, you know, kind of wrapping up in a bow tie will come together one day, my idealistic streak, is it will enable us to use resources more efficiently and effectively. And really that's what we're here to do. Because getting back to my initial comment is that if we can lower the cost in the system, then we can do more with the money we have. And that's what it's about, because we want to change the system. All right. So that's the health plan perspective. I think you'll see that there's a lot of alignment between you know, where we're going. We're sort of like maybe a couple degrees off in terms of how we're looking at things, but we share the same goals. I think we share a lot of the same tenets in how we want to do things. And at the end result that we all, you know, aspire towards is the same. All right. Thank you very much for letting me share my perspective.